Hello and welcome to Zuloomi. So let's talk about actually running a discovery session. So you've got your prospect added, or if you're a business that has got existing clients, you've added your clients into Zuloomi simply by doing the add client. And to do that, refer back to our previous video about how to add a client. But so what we want to do now is go into the actual discovery process. So previously we added our prospect, Tom Jones from Singalong, and let's open him up. So as previously shown, the discovery process is made up of 3 sections. So in this particular case, we're going to go through the process of discovering each of those sections so that you get a deep understanding of what each section is about. So let's have a first look at the discovery process itself. So quite simply, click on Discovery, which takes you into the process. You can see here on the left-hand side that we've got various sections and each section contains questions. So if we have a look at the section here of the bank and other accounts, we've got various statements that go with those that particular grouping. So we can collapse and expand all. So let's just show what that looks like. So if I expand all, then the question is opened up and I've got boxes there where I can add in my answer. Just let me collapse that again. You'll also see here that some of these questions are mandatory. So these are marked with the asterisks, and each mandatory question has risk associated to it. So the risk profiling is about how the statement reflects the particular client that you're interviewing. So when you've received your answer, is the answer you've received, does that ring alarm bells? Does it sort of go, well, meh, it's not really that important, so it's a low risk, or it's not appropriate to this client at all? So for example here, the how are personal expenses captured, if somebody were to say to me that they're mixed in with all my business accounts and I have 200 different transactions per month, for example, on a statement, then I might want to attribute a medium or high risk to the idea that the personal expenses are captured on the business statement. So the determination of risk on each of our mandatory statements then helps us to identify how we're going to add that risk as a contingency aspect when it comes to our pricing. With each of the mandatory statements, you are required to add in a comment. So in this example here, how are personal expenses captured, I could say something like added in with business bank account over 200 transactions per month. And that gives me some detail of why I've given it a medium risk rating. Each of the statements also has an additional information. So if you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be identifying with each of these statements, then just hover over the little info button and that gives you a deeper insight. All mandatory statements must be completed. That's why they're mandatory. So what you would do is you would scroll down, you would complete each statement, especially the mandatory ones. The other ones there are for additional information, so you can expand each individually and update it accordingly. So in this case here, yes, ATO ICA on balance sheet, and that's awesome. So once we've completed each of the mandatory, in this particular case here, PayPal, I'm going to say it's not applicable and not applicable. And requirements for intercompany loan account is also not applicable. And once I've completed each of those mandatory statements, I can then move on to the next field. If I haven't marked it as marked a mandatory statement, then I won't be able to proceed to the next section. Once I've completed a section, maybe not for all statements, but specifically for the mandatory statements, then I'll get a green tick on my particular grouping. I can also move between sections, so I don't have to do all this in sequence. So as I move between, I get different questions, and what I would suggest that you do is that you familiarise yourself with these questions before engaging on the discovery process. So how would I actually do this with a client? Well, first of all, I would be very familiar with the sort of questions that I want to answer. I would also be very familiar with the questions that are mandatory. So either I have this in front of me and I'm talking to a client over the phone, or I might have a face-to-face situation, and that's always great because then you're reading body language. But ideally, you wouldn't be reading these questions off the screen because that just comes across as very stiff and staged, and also it doesn't allow for the flow of conversation. So the best thing about a discovery session is that the flow of conversation should be natural. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the ebb and flow of the conversation takes you into separate sections. Okay, so the questions around bank accounts might then lead into payroll questions or whatever it might be. So that way then I'm acting very natural. And there'll be times too where you'll have to revisit a particular grouping because you haven't maybe received enough information, or the questions you were asking, so say for example under the insights area, the questions you were asking were getting a little bit sensitive and you needed to back away, but you then also need to go back into that a bit further. So our education platform definitely helps you understand the value determination insight questions in greater detail as well. So with the discovery process, as I said, you complete that on whatever method is best suited to that particular lead that you've got, and then once you've completed it all, then you can move on to the other sections of health check or decision tree. Now, as explained before, a health check section may not necessarily be appropriate for the particular business that you're talking to. It might be a startup business, whereas a business that's been in business for a while, they may have some legacy baggage that they've got with them, and specifically their particular file might be a bit of a mess, or it might be perfectly fine. Who knows? You won't know until you've actually completed the health check. So very similar to the overview of the discovery process, we've got some different groupings here, which then has different questions as to what sort of things you should be looking for when you're looking at a particular business. So when you've looked at these sections, for example, is there an ATO account? In this case, I would say no. GST liability, never reconciled, a mess, etc., etc. So then our status can be updated to say it's been checked. So you would go through each of the different sections, and if it's not relevant, then you just mark that with an NA. Again, once I've completed these sections, yes, a mess. Then I can click on to next, and I get a tick when I've completed that particular section. The decision tree allows me to go through a flow of questions that allows me then to determine what package is best suited for this particular client. So let's have a look at how that looks. So are we registered for GST? Yes. Are we an employer? Yes. Is my business a TPAR relevant industry? No, it's not. Do I lodge a monthly payroll IAS? Yes, I do. Do I lodge payroll tax? No, I don't. Do I have more than 4 employees? Yes, I do. Do I have more than 3 bank or credit card accounts? Yes, I do. And that is now determined that we're on a professional plan. So the professional plan PDF is what you would use at this initial stage of Zuloomi, where you then do the pricing. So once you've determined the professional, you can download the PDF, and this takes you through the actual pricing methodology to do with Zuloomi pricing. Then as the Zuloomi app is built out, then the pricing module will all be contained within the app itself. How to go through the pricing module, the pricing PDF is going to be the information of an additional video. So once you've completed the 3 sections, you'll see here that Tom Jones has been updated with a suggested package of professional. His risk rating was not yet determined because we haven't completed our discovery. And we can also update the status manually by saying he's in discovery status here, which then if we save our client and go back to the dashboard, it's also updated the status on the dashboard. So that's a very brief overview of how to conduct a discovery. And obviously with our education platform, there'll be greater depth of knowledge around that as well. So what I suggest you do is you add in your prospects and your existing client, and then for example, with an existing client, you can then go through this process and see how well you've actually priced that, and that may give you some wonderful insights as how you could actually reprice that particular existing client.